If you've ever been to the big museum on Chambers Street, you'll know that one of the most kind of spectacular rooms, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, about, is it 3 or 4 stories, just full of dead animals. People went into that room. It's a taxidermist's dream. I don't know who got the job for that taxidermy dog, but he must have made a mint off of filling those animals with stuff in. Kids are terrified by it. It's my general experience. But one of the main attractions in that room of death is a set of scales. And you can stand on these scales and it tells you what weight of animal you compare to. Who dreamt that up? Who thought, here's what tourists will love, a room of death where they can learn that they weigh the same as a hippo. Folk are going to love that. They'll come from the ends of the earth for that bad boy. It's a weird thing. Now I talk about scales and weights of animals because in verse 18, if you look at verse 18 again, Paul talks about our present suffering. Now let me ask you a very personal, maybe painful question about your present suffering. If you were to place your present suffering on the scales in that room of the museum, what weight of animal would they compare to? For some of us, it would be going maybe a meerkat. Like, life's pretty good. There's a few niggles. But actually, I'm not feeling much of that weight of present suffering at the moment. For others, it's very different, isn't it? It's a blue whale. Not just sitting on the scales, but feeling like it is smothering the life out of my soul. Now, if that's you this morning, verse 18 of Romans chapter 8 is written for you. Paul says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. See that word consider? It's an important word in the book of Romans. I don't know if you remember when we had a mirror up here for chapter 6, verse 11, and we said this is the first command in Romans, where he says, count yourself as dead to sin, alive to God in Christ Jesus. Do you remember that? And he was saying, this match is one in your mind. The battle's in the brain. You've got to think clearly about this. Who are you? Now, this word consider is the same word from chapter 6, verse 11. And when your soul is smothered by present suffering, this is what Paul wants your mind to be concentrated on and considering. I consider that our present suffering is not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Paul is saying that our present suffering is painful. And there is just the general suffering that we all experience just for living in a world wrecked by sin. But as Christians, if you look at verse 17, he says there is an added suffering that comes just by being united to Jesus. And I know that for some of us, in the last week, and in the last month, and in the last year, your present suffering has been particularly sore. But Paul is saying, if you are in Christ, there is a glory coming for you, actually a glory coming in you, that is so heavy, so weighty, so glorious, that your present suffering isn't worth comparing to. So think again about that room of death at the museum. What do you think the lightest animal is? And what do you think the heaviest animal is? Lightest is probably something like a butterfly. Heaviest one is probably, I think it is a blue whale that hangs from the ceiling. Now, is it a hard question to go, which is heavier? A butterfly or a blue whale? It's not a hard question. We had the boys in here on Tuesday doing football after school. Ollie's one of them. And we were doing riddles at the half-time break. And I asked them, What's heavier, a ton of feathers or a ton of bricks? And they found it really hard. Oh, this is a trick question. It's the feathers. It's the feathers. A ton's a ton. What's heavier, a butterfly or a blue whale? They're not worth comparing. And Paul is saying, and I say this sensitively, even if it sounds insensitive, that your present suffering is butterfly-like compared to the blue whale weight of glory that God is promising you in Christ. Now, he's not saying that in any way to minimize your present suffering. He's saying it to maximize the future glory. Now, let me ask you another question just to help you get it. So, first question, what weight would your present suffering be on that scale? Second question is related to the room of death. Whenever you go into a room of animals like a zoo or a kind of taxidermy thing, if you've got a young child with you, what's one of the questions you ask? What noise does that make? And you make them mimic the animal. Now, if I was to ask you, what noise does your present suffering make you make? How would you look at it? Maybe sweary words. Maybe just sobs of tears. Probably groans. Did you notice how groaning these verses were when we heard them from Romans 8? Present suffering makes us groan. Pain makes us groan. Burdens make us groan. But to nick another metaphor from Romans chapter 8, and to milk it for all it's worth, Paul says, if you're in Christ, this weight of future glory changes the tone of a Christian's groan, so that it's not just a groan of agony, it's a groan of anticipation. It's not just a groan of pain, but it's like the pain or the groan of childbirth. Now, my guess is Kirsten is probably groaning as much as anyone in GCC at the moment, given that she's heavily pregnant. But her groaning is different, isn't it? So it is painful, and it will get more painful. Times it'll feel like she's giving birth to a blue whale. But it's purposeful. And the reason that illustration flies is this is baby number 3. If you've done it twice and you'll go again, it's showing, although there's an agony, there's the anticipation of a beautiful baby. Present suffering will give way to future glory. It's not just an agony groan as a future mom, it's an anticipatory groan. And this is what Paul wants us to consider. If you are in Christ, the pattern is that the groans of crucifixion will give way to the glory of resurrection. We do groan, but we are not just groaning in pain. We are groaning for glory. And that's what we're going to see this morning. 3 groans. There aren't empty, meaningless, purposeless groans, but they are groaning for this weight of glory. So I'm going to show you 3. Here's the first one. Verses 19 to 22. We have creation, who's groaning for glory. And it's waiting for new birth. So creation's groaning for glory, waiting for new birth. Look at verses 19 to 22 again. For creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it in hope. Words. In hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. So who's groaning here? creation. It hasn't always grown. When God made it, he made creation to be the theatre of his glory. And at the beginning, there was no groans. It was just the oohs and ahs of the original spectators. But when those original spectators, Adam and Eve, fell, they took creation with it. And their sin sent shockwaves through every part of creation and left their sinful fingerprints on absolutely everything. So that, to use the language of Paul, creation is now subjected to frustration and in bondage to decay. This theatre of glory now tells a very different story. There's this cycle where the beauty of conception, birth, and growth are chased down and overshadowed by decline, death, and decay. You can hear creation groan. Blood-stained, mismanaged. David Attenborough will tell you all day long, creation is groaning. And Paul agrees with him to a certain extent, but David Attenborough would say this is creation's death throes. What does Paul say? These groans are not death throes, they are birth. Creation itself is waiting for the time when God will bring it from groaning and frustration into glory and freedom. God is going to make everything new. God is going to set everything free. Too often we say, my hope is heaven. It's not. It's heavier than that. What hope is Paul putting on the scales for Christians? It's that God is going to set the whole creation free and make the whole creation new. Frustration gone, groaning gone, freedom here, glory here. What's he placing on the scales? An entire new creation, where everything that hunts you down and makes you hurt is expelled. Our hope is not just that God will take us out of this creation, but it is the renewal of all creation. That's a heavy hope, isn't it? That's resurrection reassurance. He's making everything new. And creation is groaning for that. But it's interesting, it says that creation is not just groaning for that, but it is groaning in waiting for it as it waits for us. So here's the second groan. Creation is groaning for glory as it waits for new creation, new birth. But in verses 23 to 25, he talks about Christians groaning. Again, it's a groaning for glory, but this time the picture is not new birth, it's new bodies. Have a look at verse 23. Not only so not just creation groaning, we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we're saved. But hope that's seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what we already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. So the picture for creation was birth pains. The picture for Christians is first fruits. It's a farming picture. I don't know any people who watched Clarkson's Farm. People binge watched that new series yet. There's a great moment where he buys in some mushrooms and he puts them in an old bomb shelter on his farm and he leaves them be and he comes back a little while later to see if there's been any fruit. Flip me as there'll be fruit. Mushrooms everywhere. And he gathers the first one of the harvest, but then when he comes back again and again and again, the mushrooms are just growing crazy. And that first entrance into the bomb shelter, where he sees the first fruits of the crop, he doesn't quite get that they are just the promise of more. The first fruits are the assurance of more fruits. Do you get that? Now, what's he saying about Christians? He says, we have the first fruits of the Spirit. I don't know about you, but sometimes the weight of my present suffering feels like it's way more in my life than the fruit of the Spirit in my life. Paul says, we've only got the first fruits of the Spirit. And first fruits is the promise of more fruit. Verse 23 really confused me this week, because what does he say we're waiting for? He says we're waiting for our adoption. But what did he say last week? He said you are assured of your adoption. He said the Spirit testifies deep in your spirit that you are a child of God. Whereas this week he says I'm waiting for it. And I'm left going, Paul, make up your mind. Am I adopted or will I be adopted? And Paul says, both. You have the first fruits of the Spirit now, but that is the guarantee of more fruits then. You have the first fruits of adoption now, but that is the promise of more fruit then. So I do know the first fruits of my adoption in that the Spirit testifies in my spirit that I'm a child. But the more fruits of my adoption is that he won't just testify to my spirit that I'm a child, but that he will bring redemption to my body as a child of God. He's saying that my spirit has already been redeemed, set free from sin. But one day my body will be redeemed and be set free from all sin and all suffering. Do you get that? First fruits, more fruits thing. One day my body, your body if you're in Christ, will be redeemed from everything that has ravaged and wrecked it. You will receive a new body to enjoy the new creation. Linda won't need her sticks. She's great news. She won't be able to hit us with them. Linda will be running in new creation because of a new body. Redeemed. That's our hope. And so although we groan, we are not groaning meaninglessly. It changes the tone. I don't know if you noticed the word, we groan eagerly. So it's no longer just a groan of exasperation. I'm so fed up with this bad thing. It's not that tone. It's, I can't wait for that good thing. I am fed up with the bad thing, but I can't wait for the good thing. It's the teacher saying, I can't wait for the summer holidays. It's Josh and Amy going, I can't wait to be married. It's not just I can't stand the pain, it's I can't wait for the good. But it's also not just a groan of pain. Paul says it becomes a groan that's patient. It's not just painful saying, I'm in so much pain, I can't wait for this to end. It feels like it will never end. It's a groan that says I can be patient. Because I know it will end, I can endure. And that changes the tone, doesn't it? I know that glory is coming. I know that one day I will see Christ in a new creation, in a new body, with frustration and groaning are gone, and freedom and glory is all that's left. I want that, and I can wait for that. Now, if you're not a Christian and you're here, you're probably going, doesn't seem like a very heavy hope. It seems like heavy hallucinations. What are you guys smoking? New creation, new bodies, all this kind of stuff. And I get that. As Christians, we battle with doubts about this. I'm tempted to make everything about this world. And I find it hard to believe that one day Jesus will renew my body and renew this whole creation, because the weight of suffering is so much. If you're toiling with that, let me prescribe something. We're reading Luke's Gospel at the moment. Just take note of all the miracles that Jesus does for people's bodies. When we get to the end of Luke's Gospel, take note of all the opportunities Jesus gives for people to see and feel and touch his resurrection body. What's he demonstrating? Not just his power in the past, but that he is setting a pattern for the future. He's not just someone who's about taking people's souls to float about in clouds in heaven. He is about redeeming the whole creation and redeeming people's bodies. And the miracles you see in the eyewitness testimonies in the Gospels are promises and patterns of what he is one day going to do. And hope is when you realize that a whole different worldview is possible because of what Jesus has done. So if you're a Christian, you're looking back and say, I see what he's done in the past. You see how that sets a pattern for the future. And that allows me to be eager in waiting, but waiting in eager. And if you're here and you're not a Christian, the sobering thing for you is that the pattern of suffering in this world is just a preview of the suffering to come in the next world. The hell is real. And unless you come to Christ now, today, soon, there is no guarantee that life will get any better for you, even in the relief of death. All the hopes we have in this world are like a room full of dead animals. They might look good, but they are empty. You place them on the scales of life and they weigh nothing. What we found in Jesus is a heavy hope that can outweigh even the worst earthly suffering. Now that's why for a Christian, we need to get to this last bit of groaning, right? If you look at verses, where are we? 26 to 27. So we've had creation is groaning for glory, waiting for new birth. Christians are groaning for glory, waiting for new bodies. This third one's surprising. The Spirit, God the Spirit, is groaning for glory, helping us in our weakness. Look at verse 26 again. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We don't know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with wordless groans, and he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. From my experience, suffering often comes with a kind of double agony. Some of you will experience that when you suffer, sometimes people withdraw from you. And you get to a point where you're not just at an end of yourself, but you are all by yourself. And sometimes we map that onto God and we say, if I'm suffering, it's because God has abandoned me. He's gone. But the God of the Bible is not the God who moves away from our suffering. He is the God who has entered into our suffering. And he's not gone from us. The Bible is telling us he groans for us. Now we do see that most clearly in the person of his Son, Jesus Christ. In the pages of the Bible, in the pages of history, he stepped into this world and God groaned. You can read the Gospels and you see him. He groans out of hunger. He groans out of thirst. He groans out of tiredness. He groans when he is abandoned by his friend in his suffering. But he doesn't just groan for himself. He groans for others. So he groans deep in his being when he sees people that are harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. He groans when he sees people who are ravaged by the brutality of injustice. He is moved for people. It's more than that. He doesn't just groan because of our suffering. We're told that he even groans bearing our suffering. That on the cross, Jesus groans for us. He suffers the weight of hell for us. The heaviness of what my sin deserves, he groans for. He's not just taking my sin, he is taking all my suffering. How can he do that? How can he endure that? For the joy set before him, future glory. He knows that crucifixion groans will be replaced by resurrection glory. He knows that his pains on the cross are like the pains of childbirth. He's giving birth to the children of God. He's dying like a seed so that there might be a massive harvest. But what Paul's saying today is it's not just that God the Son groaned for us in the past, but God the Spirit groans for us in the present. I've loved this week. So many of us have been suffering this week. And as I've thought of you and I've prayed for you, when suffering comes, one of the hardest things is you hardly know how to express yourself in words. It's too excruciating for me to explain. And then on the other hand, when suffering comes, it's hard to know how this fits into God's will. It's too impossible for me to imagine. And I'm left between these two things. I don't know how to put this into words. I can't see how this fits into your will. You've been there? Maybe you are there. In that moment, in that weakness, this is where the Spirit comes. And he says, I haven't gone from you, I'm groaning for you. And the important thing we need to see, the connection between here is the groans of the Spirit and the will of God. I think what he's saying is, the Spirit doesn't just see our present suffering, he does. But the Spirit sees our future glory. But he also knows the will of God that joins those two things together. And so he groans for us. But not just a groan of agony, a groan of anticipation. He groans for us because he can see the glory even though we can only see the present suffering. And so he groans to say, even though you may not have the words to say it yourself, I'll say it for you. And even though you can't see the roadmap from your present suffering to the future glory, I can see the will of God all the way. And he comes to you today. And he is saying, let me groan for you to help you trust God's heart, even if you can't trace his hand. And so my prayer for you, wherever you are, is that even though your weight of present suffering might feel like a blue whale, the Spirit will take the blue whale from present suffering and put it on the side of future glory. He'd help you see that it is butterfly-like compared to that. And that he can see the will of God all the way. That's what we